Okay, so we're going to take a look at the equation of exchange in this demo. And the equation of exchange is really supposed to demonstrate to us how the Federal Reserve or monetary policy in general really more so impacts the money supply and the level of inflation, especially in the long run, than it does anything that really is fundamental to the economy. So the equation of exchange, MV equals PY, where M is equivalent to the money supply, which in our equation here is 17.2 trillion. V, which is velocity, and is equal to 1.25. I'll explain how we got to that value. P, in this case, is the price level, which, since we're using the CPI instead of the Federal Reserve preferred PCE value, I had to calculate it so that it is effectively showing that price levels have increased 11.4% since 2012, and the real level of GDP, which is a Y, and is $19.072 trillion. Again, reminding you that the real GDP is nominal GDP after stripping out the impact of inflation. So what are we looking at here? The equation of exchange in the short run, any of these variables can change, because in the short run, any of these variables can change. In the long run, though, which is important to understand, we assume that there are a couple of constants in the equation. So we assume, for example, that velocity is a constant, and we assume that the real level of output in the economy, the real GDP, is a constant. So what does that mean? If the Federal Reserve enacts monetary policy primarily by changing the money supply, which is an implicit reaction from changing the interest rate, then what we can gather from that is that their changes in the long run will really only seem to impact inflation in the form of just changing the price level. Because in the long run, velocity is always going to be what we assume here is 1.25, and the real level of output in the economy is determined by factors that have nothing to do with inflation, right, or the money supply. It's determined by factors like employment levels in the economy, the level of capital in the economy, and the level of technology or productivity as well in the economy. So what we get from that then is that a change in the money supply will, in the long run, shift the price level or shift inflation. Now, I want to explore a bit more some of the I want to explore a little bit more the variables here. So the money supply is something that we call exogenous in economics. It's a value that we accept that we get from outside. So in this equation, the money supply for 2019 is $17.2 trillion. The rate of velocity, though, is a implied value that I want to show you how we arrived at. So if you look here in the formulas, right, this is pulling from the control panel in cell C13. So let's go to C13 on the control panel, and we can look at the formula from here, and we can see that the formula for velocity seems to be C8 divided by C11. So what are those cells? Cell C8 is the nominal level of GDP in the economy in 2019. C11 is the money supply in the economy in 2019. Both of these are in billions of dollars. So we can tell the nominal GDP in 2019 was around $21.4 trillion, and the money supply in the economy is $17.2 trillion. So if you divide the nominal GDP, the $21.4 trillion, by the money supply in the economy, 17.2 trillion, that's how we get our velocity number of about 1.25. This is important because this is the theory behind velocity. The idea here is that we're trying to figure out how much economic activity, which would be a nominal GDP, how much economic activity was created by the amount of money supplied in the economy. So if we know that $17.2 trillion of money stimulated, or I should say facilitated, $21.4 trillion of economic activity, then that gives us an idea that each dollar that we pushed into the economy, or each dollar that existed in the economy, was used roughly 1.2 times, or almost 1.3 times. Um, Velocity can be an indication of health in an economy. So higher levels of velocity could indicate that people are being more active and are doing more with the money that's being supplied. It can also mean that people are afraid of what's going to happen to the future of that economy and are less willing to hold on to any of the currency. So, really, interpreting the velocity number is important in the context of other things that we know about the economy. Um, Historians suggest that velocity was high for the Confederacy of the United States during the Civil War, probably in part because people were unwilling to hold on to Confederate currency in light of how the war was turning out. So while higher number for velocity seems like it would intuitively be a good thing, keep in mind that it's always in the context of what's going on in the wider economy. Uh, so for the rest of the equation, the price level is, again, this is also exogenous in this case because we're accepting that the price level is the consumer price index, the change in consumer price index since 2012, and the level of real GDP is predetermined by the levels of employment in the economy, the amount of capital in the economy, the productivity of both labor and capital, and the level of technology in the economy, or total factor production as we typically call it. So running through this equation for values for 2019, you can see we get on the left-hand side $21.42 trillion by multiplying the money supply times velocity. That is pretty much exactly what we got from just looking at nominal GDP, which makes sense because the equation is feeding off of that nominal GDP value. And on the right-hand side, we get a value of $21.246 trillion, which means the difference between the right and left-hand side here is just about $180 billion, which could be attributable to a number of things, including mismeasurements of what real GDP is. GDP, of course, is a difficult to pin down value, and it's constantly being revised. So several years from now, there will probably be a completely different estimate of what real GDP is. The fact that we are even within $200 billion of each other for both sides of this equation is a good sign. If we only knew some of this information, we could use that to back into the other values. So for example, if we only had an idea of what the price level, the level of inflation was in the economy, and what the real level of output was in the economy, we could use that along with the money supply to figure out what velocity is. So I'm just trying to make the point that we can use information from just parts of this equation to figure out the rest of what's going on here. Of course, the overarching point here, right, the takeaway is that for monetary policy, it's really in the long run only going to impact the level of inflation in the economy. The Fed can't fix fundamental issues in our economy. They cannot fix our employment problems. They cannot fix our technology problems. They cannot fix our capital problems. Those are issues that have to be addressed by other aspects of the economy.